It gives me a great pleasure to open this celebration of George Gamow in this conference in Odessa. For me, Gamow has been not only a great scientist, but also a person with enormous courage, which has signed the most impressive moment of the development of cosmology. He has used the presence of very important people, and this is usually underestimated. And this description of the facts which I will mention, they are contained in this book, which I just am completing to read and correct, which is dedicated to three major persons, Einstein, Fermi, and Heisenberg, and the birth of relativistic astrophysics. One of the chapters most important in the book is dedicated to a topic which is largely unknown all over, but especially in Russia and also in Ukraine. And I think this is such an historically important work that I have decided to add a few words while I am attempting to finish the book, which I will make sure will be translated also in Ukraine and in addition of English. But what is the key point? George Gamow, first of all, was to me a very fascinating person. As a student in St. Petersburg or in Leningrad, he was acquainted with the most important work of cosmology, of Friedman. And he worked there already on cosmology. And then his notoriety in the world was such that he was invited to one of the most important meetings in the field of physics and astrophysics, namely a conference in Denmark under the auspices of the Solvay meeting. He was invited, and he decided something typical of him to ask the highest, this was a great honor, of course, to give an invited talk there. And he was so excited that he went all the way to Molotov, asking him a favor. And he said, I'm invited to go to the Solvay conference, but to represent Russia. I think that is very important. But I would like to bring with me my wife. And Molotov asked him, and all this is written in a beautiful booklet that everybody can read, My War Line of George Gamow. And he said to Molotov, he said, well, you know, since my wife is first ballerina of the Bolshoi, I would like to bring her to the Folies Bergère as a present for our marriage. And apparently Molotov started to laugh loudly, more and more loudly, to the point that he threw him away from the office. And while he was walking away, he could still listen at a distance Molotov laughing. The day after, two people you can trace back in his war line, at the door, and he was ready already to push the two hands for being taken to under control of the KGB. But the two KGB people brought him the two passports, one from him and one for his wife. He left, and he never came back. I think this is a fantastic example of independence and intelligence, which everybody should keep in mind, how to overcome difficulties using the intelligence of a scientist. The life of Gamow developed in many places, in Brazil, in the Urca process, but in the Casino da Urca, where they invented a process about gravitational collapse. We took the name of the Casino da Urca, where they were looking at the ballerina while they were discussing together with on cosmology. But what is most important in the history of physics has been the collaboration between Gamow and Fermi. Fermi has been a tremendous scientist. This is the book dedicated to him. And the first time we have published there 9 papers printed by Fermi while he was a student in the Scuola Normale Superiore. It was fantastic because some of the ideas of the Fermi transfer were developed, and there was nobody else, even Levi Civita, who had the power of understanding the physics of Einstein equations more than Fermi. But at the end of that period, when he was in Florence, and you will read the papers, which are fantastic, there was a concorso cattedra. Levi Civita was in the committee. Therefore, Fermi assumed that, in base of his fantastic knowledge in general relativity, he would gain the chair of theoretical physics. But through the Italian style manipulation of all these concorsi, he lost. And later on, he won another concorso in Cagliari. And indeed, he was called on the second chair, but he had decided, this is the tragedy of Fermi, not to work any longer in all his life on Einstein theory. A decision which was marked, and I describe in the book. Of course, there were other topics of interest. The nuclear physics of the neutron, for which he got the Nobel Prize. But before the end of his life, motivated by Gamow, he decided to make a paper with Gamow with the purpose of showing a mistake in Gamow's assumption, not the success. But the fantastic story of this event is that the motivation of proving Gamow wrong was so strong that convinced him to do the work and use all the knowledge of fundamental physics which he had in mind because he had just finished the project of the atomic bomb in Los Alamos. And all the cross-section were in his mind. Therefore, he decided to prove that the assumption done by Gamow of assuming a universe initially hot should not produce all the elements in the universe, and did not succeed. But paradoxically, he showed to Gamow how to do correctly the analysis, and he did this with his student, Turkevich. And they did all the computation of nucleosynthesis in the Fermi-Turkevich paper. But this introduced us to another tragedy. The Fermi-Turkevich paper, for the reluctance of Fermi, was never published by them as co-author. But Fermi asked to insert in a paper which was being published, in a book, in a review which was being published by Alfred and Hermann and partly Gamow, as a paper where it was stated at the bottom that Professor Fermi and Dr. Turkevich guarantee that all the Worgian equations are exactly corresponding to the one he decided. But what was the reason? The reason is that he had decided to make the computation promoted by Gamow using the Einstein equation, the Friedman universe of a hot universe. And one of the critical points is that Fermi did not give to Einstein the authority of using the validity of his equation, which in his own words were not yet tested observationally. This is the tragedy. But the other coin of the tragedy, and this is the reason, in my opinion, why I did not publish the paper, but has to put there. And the reason is deeper, because he could not publish an article in which he condemned Einstein not to have done a theory yet tested. This was inconceivable from a man who had all done the fundamental work of Einstein theory more than anybody else. Therefore was Faust was inside him to recognize the validity of Einstein and to have objected to the validity of Einstein. In my opinion, he will never be inside himself recognizing what he wrote that he was in doubt over the validity of Einstein equation. This is my crucial point. Anyway, independently of that, what Gamow and Fermi proved was something very, very important, that not all the nucleus originally of neutrons were able in a hot universe to develop all the material in the universe. But what they proved, and was their masterpiece, that only the light element could be formed. Lithium, helium, the light one. And this, somebody else worked on this for 20 years. And I remember visiting Peebles and visiting also the other people in Princeton and ask them, what about the Fermi-Turkevich paper? And they said what it is. I put them the picture of the abundance of the element for which later they got the Nobel Prize. And they said, oh, but these are the same as the one that we are computing. And I said to them, oh, yes, but there is a difference. They are probably the same, but with a big difference that Fermi did 20 years before you, and you never recognized this in your articles. This is the tragedy. But let's move on, part of the tragedy, because I think I will explain all this in the book. But anyway, let's not forget what happened next. In Soviet Union, due to the fact that George Gamow had left with his wife and nobody could go abroad after that, convinced Yakov Borisovich Zeldovich to publish an alternative theory that the universe was not hot like Gamow predicted, but was actually cold. Experiments showed that the idea of Zeldovich, done just by propaganda in order to show that a real Soviet scientist could be smarter than Gamow, was turned out to be totally false and contrary to the data. The small light elements were essential. But what was fantastic is to see how Gamow moved. He was knighted by the Knights of Malta, and through them he managed to meet the Pope Pius XII, the great Pope of in that period in Italy. And Pius XII took very seriously the work of Gamow, so much seriously that he pronounced ex cathedra that the universe started and quoted the number of Gamow, of very light elements. And this allowed Gamow to write a paper quoting Pius XII, and he said, it's now true beyond any possible doubt that the universe, quotation, and putting his quotation, okay, and then he added Pius XII discussion ex cathedra, lecture ex cathedra, which means he was infallible. Well, all this show a nice period of collaboration and esteem among different fields of physics, which turned out to be a triumph. A triumph because I think there was a triumph by nature, because Fermi used to like very much to play tennis. He was playing tennis just, and all his theory about particle acceleration were tennis, the Fermi acceleration process. But in this case, the battle was between nature and Fermi. And nature won, not Fermi, because he made possibility to Fermi to give his important contribution and obtain the fantastic result, the most fantastic result of cosmology. This was a battle won by nature. This is my version. You will hear other version by many other people, but I think I would not like to spend additional time, and I will make sure to finish the book Einstein, Fermi, Heisenberg, where I also discuss not only about Einstein in Italy, all the terrible period in which Einstein was not accepted in Italy, to the point that his best collaborator in Italy, Tullio Levicivita, was fired from the University of Rome following the anti-Semitical law, and I discuss all this in the book. He had to resign from all the academy in Italy, but with the only academy of the Vatican confirming his adhesion. This were a terrible thing in which later, when I went to the state in Princeton, I decided to do something about. And using Amaldi, we first tried to improve on the detection of gravitational wave by going to low temperature technique. And then we founded ICRA and ICRANet. ICRANet today is all over the world with collaboration agreement. And I would like to have a commitment with the Italian government, but not only Italian, the European government, to found in Odessa, in this new era, an ICRANet center dedicated to George Gamow. This is the minimum tribute we can offer to a scientist. And be careful. Read very attentively the report given by Fermi on their common work. And there is a point in that Fermi paper, which was published independently later, that he mentioned precisely the idea to have led to the estimate of the temperature of the cosmological radiation, and this was a masterpiece of George Gamow. I am always puzzled. I remember I asked Wheeler, but how can it be that Fermi used 2 decimal number in the temperature? He said, oh, maybe some combination. No, it was not some combination. It was the profound intuition of George Gamow, which led him not only to understand the fundament of cosmology and the temperature of the universe, but also biology and all the other DNA structure which were hypothesized by this great man, which was born in 1904 in the time of Odessa. We need to do an ICRANet Center with the international collaboration in Odessa to celebrate him. I am convinced that this is a moral duty.